You had the whole day. You told yourself this was finally the day you'd get it done. And then, somehow, hours passed, and you did almost everything except the one thing that actually mattered. Sound familiar? Here's the thing. Almost nobody tells you. Procrastination has almost nothing to do with laziness and everything to do with how your brain handles emotional discomfort. Researchers at Carleton University in Canada conducted large-scale studies on procrastination and found that it is fundamentally a problem of emotion regulation, not time management. That distinction matters enormously because it completely changes how you should approach fixing it. When you avoid a task, you're not avoiding the work itself. You're avoiding the feelings that task triggers: anxiety, self-doubt, boredom, fear of failure, or even fear of success. Your brain interprets those emotions as a threat, and it does what brains are brilliantly designed to do. It steers you away from the threat. The problem is that in modern life, the threat isn't a predator, it's a spreadsheet. It's an email you've been putting off. It's a creative project you care about so deeply that starting it feels terrifying. Your ancient survival-wired brain doesn't know the difference. And every time you successfully avoid that discomfort by scrolling, cleaning, or doing literally anything else, your brain logs that escape as a win. It reinforces the avoidance. So the next time that task comes up, the urge to flee is even stronger. This is a loop, a self-reinforcing cycle built right into your neurology, and understanding it is the first step to breaking it. To really understand why this happens, you need to meet two parts of your brain that are constantly arguing with each other. The first is the limbic system, particularly a structure called the amygdala. This is the emotional, reactive, deeply ancient part of your brain. It processes threats, triggers fear responses, and is obsessed with your immediate emotional comfort. The second player is the prefrontal cortex, located right behind your forehead. This is the rational, planning, future-focused part of your brain, the part that understands deadlines, consequences, and long-term goals. Now here's where it gets fascinating. These two systems don't have equal power in every moment. When your emotional brain senses discomfort, it can effectively hijack the rational brain's ability to steer your behavior. Neuroscientist and researcher Fuskia Sirois, who has published extensively on procrastination, describes it as prioritizing short-term mood repair over long-term goals. Your limbic system says feel better now, and your prefrontal cortex, despite knowing better, often loses that fight. Brain imaging research has even shown structural differences in the brains of chronic procrastinators. A 2018 study published in Psychological Science found that people who procrastinate more tend to have a larger amygdala and weaker functional connections between the amygdala and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the region that translates intentions into action. So if you've spent years blaming yourself for lacking discipline, consider this. The architecture of your brain may be making the battle harder for you than it is for other people. That's not an excuse to give up. It's a reason to stop relying on shame and willpower and start using strategies that actually work with your brain instead of against it. Now let's talk about the loop itself, because once you see it clearly, you start to notice it happening in real time. And that awareness is genuinely powerful. It starts with a trigger. The trigger is usually a task that carries some form of psychological threat. Maybe it's a project tied to your sense of competence. Maybe it's a conversation that could lead to conflict. Maybe it's something with no clear right answer, which creates uncertainty, and your brain absolutely hates uncertainty. That trigger generates a negative emotion, anxiety, dread, overwhelm, frustration, and before your conscious mind even fully registers what's happening, your brain has already begun scanning for relief. That's when the phone appears in your hand. That's when you suddenly remember the dishes need doing. That's when you open a new browser tab for absolutely no reason. And here's the cruel twist. The moment you engage with that distraction, you get a small but real hit of relief. The emotional pressure drops. And your brain, which is always learning and always optimizing for what worked last time, files that away. Avoidance worked. Do it again. Psychologists call this negative reinforcement, not punishment, but the removal of something unpleasant that makes a behavior more likely to repeat. You weren't rewarded with something good. You were rewarded with the absence of something bad. And that kind of reinforcement is actually one of the most powerful drivers of repeated behavior in all of psychology. The task, meanwhile, has not gone away. In fact, as the deadline grows closer, or the guilt builds up, the task becomes even more emotionally charged, which makes avoiding it next time even more likely. This is why procrastination tends to spiral, and why simply trying harder rarely breaks the cycle. So, if willpower doesn't work, and shame makes things worse, what does the research actually recommend? Let's go through the strategies that are backed by real evidence. The first and perhaps most counterintuitive one is self-compassion. A study by Michael Wohl and colleagues at Carleton University found that students who forgave themselves for procrastinating on a first exam were less likely to procrastinate on the second one. Not more likely, less. Because guilt and self-criticism amplify the emotional weight of the task, making avoidance more tempting. Self-compassion reduces that weight, making it easier to actually begin. The second strategy is called temptation bundling, a concept developed by behavioral scientist Katie Milkman. The idea is to pair a task you're avoiding with something you genuinely enjoy. Only listen to your favorite podcast while doing administrative work. Only watch a show you love while folding laundry. You're not tricking your brain. You're genuinely changing the emotional valence of the task by associating it with something rewarding. Third, and this is rooted in implementation intention research by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer, specificity destroys procrastination. Vague goals like "I'll work on the report this week" are easy to avoid. But a plan that states "I will work on the report on Tuesday at 9 a.m. at my desk for 45 minutes" activates a completely different cognitive pathway. Studies show this kind of if-then planning can more than double follow-through rates. Finally, shrinking the task works because it lowers the emotional activation threshold. You don't commit to finishing the project, you commit to opening the document, just opening it, that's it. Because starting is the hardest part neurologically, and once you've started, the brain's natural desire for completion often takes over. Here's what makes all of this genuinely hopeful. Your brain is not fixed. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through repeated experience, means that the procrastination loop you've been running for years is not permanent. Every time you use one of those strategies and successfully begin a task you would have otherwise avoided, you are literally laying down new neural pathways. You're teaching your amygdala that this task is survivable. You're strengthening the connection between intention and action in your prefrontal cortex. Over time, the emotional charge around certain tasks genuinely decreases. The brain stops flagging them as threats because your track record says they're not. Researcher Piers Steele, who literally wrote the book on procrastination, a volume called The Procrastination Equation, concluded after decades of research that the core of the problem is always the relationship between present emotion and future reward. The more you can make the present moment feel less threatening and the future reward feel more vivid and real, the more your behavior shifts naturally. Visualization helps with that. Spending 30 seconds imagining how you'll feel once the task is done, genuinely done, off your plate, behind you, activates reward circuitry in the brain and tips the emotional balance. It's not magic. It's neuroscience applied deliberately. And none of this requires you to become a different kind of person. It requires you to understand the person you already are, a human being with a brain that evolved for a very different world, doing its absolute best to keep you comfortable. Work with that brain, not against it, and everything changes. If this gave you a new way of seeing yourself, do something right now that your future self will thank you for. Like this video and subscribe so you never miss content like this.